This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the very niche and kind of geeky details of modern warfare with me, Jake Hanrahan. This week we're speaking to Pawel Wojcik. He's an independent researcher focused on ISIS and Al-Qaeda. He's going to be talking about ISIS International, so basically the spread of the Caliphate of ISIS from Iraq and Syria to the rest of the world, most specifically focused on the cells or wilayats as they call it in Libya, Afghanistan, Nigeria and East Asia. Pawel will be talking about how serious these wilayats are in different countries and explaining how the fall of Raqqa was most certainly not the fall of ISIS as a whole. If you want Popular Front bonus content, including bonus episodes a few times a month, go to patreon.com/popularfront. You know, after Raqqa, everybody, or at least in the rest of the world outside the media, kind of presumed, oh, ISIS is over now, you know, the Caliphate is gone. But, you know, as we know, that very much isn't the case. What kind of threat does ISIS pose to the world at this stage?
It depends how do we treat the existence of the Islamic State now. If we take it in local way, so let's say Nigeria, Afghanistan, or Indonesia, the Philippines, the threat is there because it is locally located. The threat is there are affiliates, there are branches of the Islamic State that are a permanent problem to the societies of these countries. But when it comes to the Western countries, I think that the problem right now is significantly diminished because of the threat of the real caliphate in Syria and Iraq that possesses some land control is no more. The most of the land control is lost for the Islamic State. We have some pocket near the Euphrates River that is currently being fought between the Islamic State and the Syrian Democratic Forces. You know.
Yeah, you're on about Deir ez-Zor.
Yes, and American-led coalition, international coalition that is fighting the Islamic State there. And the fight with this pocket has been ongoing for a year now, so it's not that easy to destroy them. There is, of course, newly established Vilayat Haran near the Syrian-Israeli border and Jordan. Formerly it was called Jaish Khalid bin Walid by the famous Khalid bin Walid hero from the early Islamic states that fought against the Roman Empire. And it was all about having that land control, the safe land, in order to actually establish connection between Syria, Iraq, and the networks that are currently in the United States or in every country that is currently located in Europe.
So you're saying ISIS has created a new wilayat, which is like a new cell, essentially, inside Syria since Raqqa has been toppled?
They are located in this pocket. They are currently being renamed into one big vilayat, right? So there are dozens of vilayats so provinces, governorates in Syria and Iraq, and these are currently being renamed into Vilayat Sham, the province of Sham, Syria, and the province of Iraq. And these are the two main vilayats of the Islamic State Central that are now located in these two countries. And it seems like the Islamic State also renames its provinces outside. For example, it is a big talk today that the Philippines and Indonesia, which are gathered into one East Asia branch, is currently being renamed into Vilayat East Asia. So it probably has some kind of administration it lacked before.
ISIS are now, it sounds like, trying to regroup, but not inside Syria. They're trying to regroup outside, internationally.
It is hard to say regroup because their main timeline, their main battles were fought 2 years ago, or even 1 year ago, 3 years ago. The international coalition that is led by the United States has been operating outside Syria and Iraq, in Libya mainly, and of course in Nigeria. So the international coalition has been battling all the Islamic States wings, all the council that has spread all over the world, right? It's not only located in Syria and Iraq. And regrouping, I think we can say about regrouping that is currently happening in Libya after they were wiped out from their main capital in Sirte.
I read this as well. I read that outside of the Middle East, ISIS are most strongest in Libya, outside of, after Raqqa has fallen.
It has been for some time, but I would argue right now that the most strongest affiliate of the Islamic State is currently located in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Yeah, I'm really keen to talk about that actually. But right now, can you explain what are ISIS doing in Libya? Do they control land? Who are they fighting?
Okay, so at first, the Islamic State in Libya was non-existent. Okay, in 2013, 2014, a lot of Libyans fought in Syria and Iraq in the Islamic State affiliates that were at the time fighting near Aleppo or Raqqa, battling the Syrian regime, and they were mainly gathered in the Caliphate al-Batar al-Libi. It was consisted mainly of hundreds of Libyans. And the Islamic State in 2013 was trying to implement the new strategy. After they split with Al-Qaeda completely, they went internationally, and the first plan to actually achieve the international dominance was to conquer Libya. So they actually dispatched, it was their first and the only invasion from Syria. They dispatched the team led by some folks from Katibat al-Batar al-Libi in order to establish some networks.
So they sent ISIS fighters from Syria into Libya.
Yes, it was a direct, we can call it invasion, because it consisted of dozens of fighters, right? But these were experienced, these were battle hardened, they knew what they were planning, right? And they were tasked with establishing some kind of administration, creating a new province that would establish links with Al-Qaeda fighters that were currently fighting at the time, and to absorb them to the new province. So in 2014, they went to the city of Derna, that is now the main battleground between the Islamic fighters and General Haftar forces in the east, and established some kind of network that was able to govern a few, let's say, not blocks, but a few neighborhoods, right? But it was mainly operating in a friendly way between the Islamic State fighters and Al-Qaeda, but it was surely established that the Islamic State was not only trying to build some friendly relations with society, they wanted to absolutely govern in a totalitarian way and absorb everything like they did in Syria and Iraq.
Yeah.
So Al-Qaeda wiped them out from Derna, and the Islamic State that knew that something was going on with Al-Qaeda had sent some operatives to the famous city of Benghazi and Sirte. In a very quick way, Sirte became their main stronghold, their capital. Even Adnani, Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, the second in command after Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, said that Islamic State in Libya and 3 provinces there, so Cyrenaica, Al-Fezan in the south, and Vilayat Tarabulus in the west, would be the 3rd capital of the Islamic State. It was the only capital of the Islamic State outside Iraq and Syria, so we can see the importance.
So that became their 3rd capital. Outside, you had Raqqa, Mosul.
Raqqa, Mosul, and Sirte. This was the 3 cities mainly included in Islamic State propaganda.
And what's the current status now? I know ISIS still holds some land in Libya, but I know that, for example, the secular brigades like the Zintan brigades are like fighting them and some others. What are they up to now?
For now, the Islamic State controls no land in Libya. We can say they rather influence some territory, mainly influencing the area of Fezan in the south. So mainly the town of Sabrat, which is the main town of the smugglers from Chad, from Nigeria, from all the countries around. And it is the main hub for Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb. So this is the very important town to actually get some resources, some weapons, some intel about the location of 3 governments today in the west, in the east, led by General Haftar and Tobruk, and they are mainly focused on attacking and harassing forces that are currently governing the oil fields in the center of Libya.
Right, they're fighting for that right now, right? And General Haftar being essentially a militia leader, and those guys are fighting for the oil fields right now.
They don't want to capture it, but they want to prevent all the parties before actually making money from oil and from trading with European countries like mainly Italy and France, that are the main players right now, from what I can say, especially Italy and the new government.
So sorry, hang on, I'm confused. So ISIS are trying to stop the capture of the oil fields so that the oil can stop being sold to Europeans, essentially the infidels.
That, and of course a lot of other tasks, right? Like preventing Haftar from actively governing most of the country, preventing the internationally recognized government in Tripoli, GNA, from effectively governing the country in the west, and they are trying to split the east and the west in order to not unite again. Because as we know, the civil war in Libya has been ongoing since 4 years.
Yeah, it's one of those conflicts that the West kind of turned up, got rid of Gaddafi, and are like, hey, job done. And it's like, no, not at all. It's complete chaos there still.
Yes, and as we could hear in the Game of Thrones, chaos is a ladder. And we can surely fit it in how the Islamic State operates all over the world. Chaos is a ladder, and they are the masters of the chaos. And they are the main party that can actually get something from this chaos.
Right. With instability, they can capitalize on that as ISIS, I guess, wherever they sow that chaos.
Yes. For now, as we could see in recent two videos, especially from Vilayat Raqqa, from the east, they are fighting currently mainly against the General Haftar's forces and Tobruk government. General Haftar, as we know, runs his militia as it would be some kind of Libyan army, right? He
basically, like, Haftar is essentially a warlord or, a militia commander, but he's running the place as if he's official.
He poses as he were some kind of general, and the structure was actually an army, which is not an army. Yeah. This is a network of militias, and it doesn't happen to be anything near army. Of course, Egyptians and Emiratis are helping him and supporting him in his task, but it is in no way an army, and the Islamic State makes sure that Haftar doesn't actually make anything close to unite the East and the South, because this is another problem with tribes that are located in the South and East, who under the former leader of Libya, so Muammar Gaddafi, were fighting with each other. This is how Gaddafi was able to actually run this country for so long, because his main foes were fighting each other, and the Islamic State makes sure that these tribes actually still fight each other, and that these tribes would not actually help Haftar in uniting the country. So they are running some kind of protection force to stop Haftar from taxing these tribes. They are trying to establish some kind of patrols on the main roads and prevent Haftar forces from using that to smuggle his portion of oil. And this is the kind of stuff they are doing. And from the military view, they are currently harassing the main strategic cities and towns that are in possession of Haftar forces. As we could see recently, near Benghazi and near Tobruk, that they are able to conduct some kind of Soviet attacks. So, as we know from Hugo Kaman research, the most capable machines that the Islamic State is currently running, right? So the explosive cause, this is the main ability to stop these militias from gaining some power in the cities and controlling the oil fields, because everyone who tries to actually govern some swath of the desert knows that the Islamic State is near and they are able to conduct some kind of a suicide mission to stop them. So they are in a great fear in the center of the country.
So ISIS in Libya, basically, right now, what they're doing is just disrupting everything. They're trying to stop other militias gaining control as opposed to trying to form their own kind of caliphate.
Yes, they are running an insurgency to actually stop, as you are saying.
So I remember, I think it was 2015 when I saw a video and there was a militia in Libya called Ansar al-Sharia, and they started to use the ISIS flag, and a lot of people were like, "Oh dear, these guys are ISIS." Is that true, or is like have they brought other tribes in and other groups, or are they their own thing?
Yes, it was true. Actually, it was true because Ansar al-Sharia as a whole was the main branch of Al Qaeda in Libya. And of course, as always, it happens in every country where there is Al-Qaeda, that some part of Al-Qaeda that is more hardline, more Salafi, than the ones who are actively supporting Al-Qaeda. The more Salafi one want to actually join the more hardline force that at the time was the Islamic State, and the Islamic State showed us that they were capable of running the country, of course the so-called country, of the size of the Great Britain. So these networks were always tearing apart, and it was the case with Ansar al-Sharia in Libya. A half of Ansar al-Sharia in Libya joined the Islamic State. From what I remember, even the deputy of the Ansar al-Sharia group joined the Islamic State, and actually was a valley in Sirte, in the main stronghold in Libya, right after. So Ansar al-Sharia, when joined the Islamic State, actually made the Islamic State much stronger, because Ansar al-Sharia was already governing some parts of the city of Benghazi and some parts of Sirte. They were already there, and it made the Islamic State it was much easier for the Islamic State to actually go in these cities and to establish a proper governance and administration in these cities. Of course, in Benghazi, it didn't happen because Haftar prevented it very quickly. But in Sirte, as we know, they conquered the host city from the militias that were there. They absorbed the more hardline Islamist militias in the city and spread all over the Sirte surroundings. And then at the time in 2016, the oil fields we were talking about were in a great danger, because Sirte is located 30-40 kilometers from the main oil fields. So it was a great danger for the oil production of the whole Libya and the supply for the European countries that are still using Libyan production to actively govern in our countries, right? So mainly Italy was in a great danger for that. That's why Italy has been supporting the militias of the city of Misrata, because Misrata was the one to actually actively battling the Islamic State and at the end wiping out Ceuta from the Islamic State with the help of the international coalition, mainly Americans who had sent special forces to Misrata and the British.
How predictable that the West would go to the aid of the militias when their oil revenue was getting affected. I think that's great on Libya. I know you've been doing a lot of research, a lot of very good research into ISIS in Afghanistan. I want to talk about that. What is going on there?
Okay, so I will skip some parts. The United States invade this country. The war has been ongoing since 17 years. So since 2001, when the Taliban lost control over most of the cities in Afghanistan, and the fight has been ongoing for so many years that everyone started losing patience, especially in the United States, but also among the Taliban, because the war is extremely long and nobody is winning, so everyone might feel frustrated with it. And in 2014, when the Islamic State was created, firstly by Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, then Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, naming himself as Caliph, the Taliban felt the heat from Syria and Iraq. As we know, Taliban are followers of the Deobandi school, and the Islamic State is a strict Salafist from Hanbali, Hanafi, and such. And in 2014, the more hardline Taliban militants started to feel that the Taliban is not something that is truly Islamic, that the Taliban is a nationalist force, that it only wants to establish an Islamic society led by Quran only in Afghanistan. So the Islamic State, that was an international force that was trying to overwhelm the whole world and win with everyone, was actually a huge task for the minds of the Salafist militants for the Taliban. But it firstly was Pakistanis that joined forces with the Islamic State. In 2014, let's say, Pakistani Taliban, most of Pakistani Taliban pledged an allegiance. It is called Bayah, an oath of allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. That was quickly acknowledged by Muhammad al-Adnani in 2015, and the province of Khorasan. This is called Khorasan Vilayat. This is how it is called, the Islamic State in Afghanistan. Khorasan Vilayat. This is how we call it, and it mainly consisted of Salafi Pakistanis at the time from the Taliban located in Pakistan, not the Afghan one. But it quickly spread over the border because it was mainly located in Fatah, in the tribal areas that are located in the north of Pakistan and administrated in, let's say, under the Sharia law. And it quickly spread over the border to Afghanistan, to Nangarhar, to Paktia, to the provinces located at the border with Pakistan, but also spread to the provinces in the south and in the north, that the Taliban felt the great danger that was coming from massive oaths of allegiances that were calling all over from Afghanistan. Let's say near the border with Iran, some Taliban affiliated militia started calling themselves Islamic State, and it was all over Afghanistan. So Taliban actually implemented a new strategy to fight not only Kabul government and US forces, but also, as we quickly found out, their main foe. So the Islamic State, this is their main enemy now, not the Afghan government, not the forces that are led by the United States, but their main enemy is Islamic State, because it is the Islamic State that might amass support for them and let Taliban actually dissolve into militias that would quickly pledge an allegiance to the Islamic State. In 2015, they started attacking every force that was pledging an allegiance to the Islamic State, and they quickly wiped them out from their main stronghold in Helmand. They wiped them from the Iran border, from Tajikistan border, all the north, all the east was won for the Taliban, except for the east, because in Nangarhar, it is quickly found out, the Islamic State created their first active stronghold in Afghanistan, in most of district of Nangarhar.
What year was that?
They actually were using compounds that were built during the Soviet war by the CIA. They were using caves, massive caves, to actually hide and to avoid the forces of the US and the Taliban.
So ISIS in Nangarhar province basically started using old Soviet compounds and places that the CIA set up in previous wars to base themselves. That's kind of hilarious in a way.
Yes, of course. And it is written all over the mainstream press that the war on the Soviets in Afghan actually turns out that now it is very disruptive for the current war, because of these compounds and caves that were built during the Afghan war, and the Islamic State entrenched themselves so much that no force would be able to actually wipe them from this location, because it was in no way a possibility for land forces to attack such entrenched positions.
Because of the terrain?
Yes, caves, mountains like Tora Bora, near the Tora Bora, where Osama bin Laden was hiding during the invasion, and all the high locations in Nangarhar, and in provinces located near, in Kunar, which is also a stronghold of the Islamic State. But in Nangarhar it was mainly visible, and the US finally acknowledged the threat that was coming not from Syria and Iraq, but also from Afghanistan. The same people they were fighting in Iraq and Syria are in Afghanistan.
So sorry, let me just break that down. So now recently as well, right? America is starting to get attacked by ISIS inside Afghanistan.
Yes.
What do they do? What are their actions been against the Americans?
Well, the Islamic State established terror cells in the main cities like Kabul or in Nangarhar's capital Jalalabad, and they started to bomb very actively every military site, every religious site that was not Islamic in their way, of course. So it was Sufis, it was Hindu followers of Shia Islam, right? So that threat was very wide and spread. Not only the Taliban, but the Afghan military, the US forces located in Jalalabad. All the things were happening in 2015, 2016. So Americans acknowledged this threat and decided that it is finally needed to actually delete the Islamic State from Nangarhar, because it was too much of a threat for Afghanistan and Pakistan to let it go alone. So the US started with sending US special forces to Nangarhar to battle the Islamic State Khorasan province.
So the US right now is sending special forces into Nangarhar province to fight ISIS in Afghanistan, whilst the war is still going on between the Taliban, whilst the war is still going on against ISIS in Syria, just about.
Yes, the Taliban is still fighting the US forces, but the special forces of the US are fighting what they think is the main threat to Afghanistan, the Islamic State.
What a mess, eh? What an absolute mess.
Yes, this is such a mess.
Well, it's the Western, like, I think idiocy and complacency within these wars to think they can just go in and then leave or invade or whatever. And now look what happens. They end up fighting on about 10 different fronts.
Yes, 10 different fronts. And, but you know, I think that they took the best decision they actually could, because we can talk to the Taliban. We can negotiate with the Taliban. We can talk and we can negotiate with the Islamic State. They are too much of a threat for every country they are in, as we can see in Syria, Iraq, Nigeria, Philippines. They are not the force to negotiate with. They are the force to kill and to wipe them from the map. So the US took the best decision they could, because as we found out in 2017, Americans pulled out the main bomb that is not nuclear, the famous Moab.
Oh, the mother of all bombs, yeah.
Yes, and they hit it in Nangarhar, in the district of Ashin. And from what we could say, at the time, there was no that threat, so Americans could actually place the bomb there. But as the investigations from, let's say, the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, from the mainstream press, or even the Afghan press, it was found out in these investigations that the threat was really that high to actually, and it was actually a good option to place that bomb in Ashin district, because it was no way for the US special forces to actually gain any land and move any kilometer, because the Islamic State was too entrenched. There were millions of minefields. There were caves, there were these compounds we were talking about. So the US special forces would be just killing themselves by going in.
I think with the Moab, it was that as well. Obviously, the special forces couldn't get to the ISIS fighters there to attack them because of the terrain. But also, I think for the Americans, it kind of sent a message, it was kind of a significant thing, this whole mother of all bombs as well, when actually it wasn't quite as big as was explained or perhaps was as presented. But I think it definitely sent a message.
Yes, but at the same time, for the Islamic State, it is easy to say that, as you can see, the US acknowledged the threat that we pose, and the Taliban is a weak force if the Moab is not actually used against the Taliban, but it is against the Islamic State that is only located in, let's say, 3 provinces actively.
Well, let's talk about that, because ISIS are now fighting the Taliban quite heavily, right? I know on your Twitter feed the other day, I saw you putting up some images that ISIS in Afghanistan had released where they're fighting quite close combat with the Taliban in the mountains with mortars. I think there's even like some small arms. What's going on?
Well, the fights between the Islamic State and Taliban are located in 5 provinces right now. In Nangarhar, the same as against the US, in Lagman, in Kunar, so the provinces that are located near the Pakistan border, also the northern ones, near the border with Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, Jozyan, Saripur, and Farjab. And these provinces from the north, Jozyan and Saripur, are the ones we have to talk about the most, because the most significant battle ever fought between the Taliban and the Islamic State is located in the north, in the Jozyan districts of Darjab and Kushtepa. In these 2 districts, there is a huge battle ongoing, in which 200 people died in just 1 week. It was all militant, so we can just imagine how much of a force has the Taliban to fight the Islamic State there. And it was okay. So let's explain why actually there is a battle. In 2017, 1 year ago, I think it was April and May, there was a joint offensive. It might sound surprising, but there were lots of such close calls between the Taliban and Islamic State to fight Afghan government.
Wait. So sometimes, even though the Taliban is fighting ISIS in all these other provinces, sometimes they join forces to fight the Afghan government forces.
Yes, they allied themselves in order to fight Afghan government. It was April and May that the joint offensive, Taliban Islamic State joint offensive against Afghan forces was dated, and they won. They wiped out Afghan government from Darjab and most of Kushtepa. But the Islamic State, as always, didn't want to share any kind of power with any force like Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, so they stabbed them in the back, as they are always doing in every country. Yes, they killed like 50 members of the Taliban and wiped them from Darjab. And when we talk about Darjab, we have to imagine this district as a very mountainous one. The heights are very high right there. All the caves are located there, not as with Nangarhar one that were built by the CIA during the Soviet War, but these caves are actually natural ones. And inhabitants of Georgian built their homes in these caves. This is a very interesting matter. So they stabbed them in the back, they wiped them from the Arjab, and they had been actively defending themselves before the Taliban, because the Taliban tried 5 times to destroy the Islamic State in the north during the past year, but they lost every time because their commanders were not supporting themselves, but instead were behaving as warlords.
The Taliban has been around for a very long time. Nobody can argue that they're not a very good fighting force, whether you like them or not, obviously. ISIS, in this context in Afghanistan, is relatively new. Why is it the Taliban is losing to ISIS?
The Taliban is losing to ISIS because the Islamic State can actually influence new recruits. They are a new force. They showed in Syria and Iraq that they were a huge force, and they are capable of governing huge swaths of territory. And I think the ideology to all the Uzbeks, to Pashtuns and Tajiks are way more positive when it comes to the Islamic State than the Taliban, because the Taliban is more of a native force that actually allows some tribal and native rituals, like let's say believing in the power of amulets, believing in ghosts and souls, and every folk beliefs that can be located in every part of Afghanistan, and the Islamic State does not allow that. More addictive for every Salafi than the Taliban, that is also a nationalist force.
So it kind of comes down to reputation, basically. ISIS, we've seen them all over the news. They've been all over the media. They're running riot around Iraq, Syria, Libya. And when they come to Afghanistan, Salafis are like, these guys hold no prisoners. Unlike the Taliban, who, as bad as they are, actually do allow some autonomy within different sects of Islam in Afghanistan.
Yes, but there was also another task when it comes to the Islamic State being much better than Taliban. It was about the money. It always comes to money. The Islamic State always pays its fighters very, very huge cash. Of course, when it comes to Afghanistan, right? Because $500 is not that huge in the West, but in the local ground, it is actually like you would be a millionaire, right? So the Islamic State just pays the cash and gathers thousands of recruits because they can actually pay its fighters and families, and actually build a society that is not a poor one, but a prosperous one because of all the money.
How big is ISIS in Afghanistan? How many members, roughly, would you say? And also, have they been sending fighters from Iraq and Syria, or is this mostly a native franchise?
When it comes to Vilayat Khorasan, it is mainly about native fighters. Natives, so Pakistani ones, Afghan ones, Tajiks, Uzbeks, and so on. These are the natives, right? These are not, let's say, some might be regional fighters, but not not in the Western meaning, not foreign fighters that come from France, from Spain and all over the West. These are natives mainly. But when it comes to some transfers from the Middle East, so from Syria and Iraq, there were at least 70 cases that we could trace from Iraq and Syria that these fighters actually arrived to Afghanistan to establish a connection between Afghan Vilayat Khorasan and vilayats located in Iraq and Syria. 70 fighters is not a huge population of fighters. It was a very small population just to establish connection between Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria. More important cases were with the envoys that were tasked with sending the Afghan branch money, because it was not always about a local economy for the Islamic State in Afghanistan. They actually have been supported by the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. We can't say how much money actually went from Syria to Afghanistan, but we can safely say that it was a few millions at least, because the Battle of Marawi was fought by Syrian cash and it was $2 million. So for Afghanistan, it might be a lots more cash that comes from the Middle East.
So mainly it's not exactly fighters that ISIS is sending to these international branches, but money. Let's move on to the next part of the ISIS International, if you will. What's going on in Africa? Because I know Boko Haram, I think last year kind of rebranded themselves from Boko Haram to ISIS in West Africa.
Well, when it comes to West Africa, it is a very interesting case, because this is one of the two cases when the Islamic State Syria directly intervened to change the leadership of the branch. So in 2014, 2015, the Islamic State in West Africa was led by the infamous Shekau, right? Cow. The famous jihadi, made famous for his crazy speeches.
This is the guy from the Boko Haram videos who's like growling in his videos and he makes no sense and he's firing off into the air.
Madness, but as we could see in 2015, he possesses some kind of a little part of his brain, because he pledged an allegiance to the Islamic State in 2015.
Oh, it's 2015. Okay, it was longer ago than I realized.
Yes, and it was quickly acknowledged by Mohammed al-Adnani, and the Islamic State in West Africa was created.
So when Boko Haram in 2015 said, yes, we are now part of ISIS, ISIS basically confirmed that, right?
And Boko Haram was renamed to Islamic State West Africa. Shekau was in the lead for like 9 months or 10 months, because the Islamic State almost immediately after establishing the West Africa branch actually appointed a new governor, a new valley for its West Africa branch, actually dismissing Shekau and appointing the son of the first leader of Boko Haram, so Mr. Barnawi. But Shekau did not acknowledge this fact. He sent very aggressive letters to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi that the folks that are running his administration are actually lying about the current stance of his West African vilayat, that Shashakal is the most capable leader. He's smart. He's a legendary folk, and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi must surely be mistaken in appointing a new governor.
So basically, he converts his Boko Haram kind of hellhole jihadist group to ISIS, and then Baghdadi instates a new leader from Iraq, whilst he's in Iraq, and then this guy is writing to him.
Yes, they kicked him from his job right after pledging an allegiance.
That's so funny, man. So then what happened?
As we can see, it was the best decision that the Islamic State could actually opted for, because Banawi is a very capable leader, very intelligent, and he has been leading West Africa Vilayat for 2 years now, and it seems that he's on the way to become a very big threat for Nigeria, because as we could see in 2014, Boko Haram at the time was governing a lot of territory in Nigeria, but were quickly wiped out from this territory by Nigerian and US forces in 2015. At the time of Shekau being leader. But when Banawi was appointed the leader of West Africa, he regrouped and actually prevented the total collapse of the former Boko Haram, and is currently leading them in a very Middle East fashion. I have never seen such an adjustment to how the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq has been fighting. So by SVBs, by explosive cars, by the tactics from the Middle East, so hit and runs. And it all comes from the Middle East, and Banawi seems to use everything that the Islamic State invented.
Where is Banawi from?
Banawi is from Nigeria.
Right, so then he has this direct line probably to ISIS in the Middle East.
Yes, it seems so, and it seems that it is a very dangerous development right now, because you might have seen my tweets about it, and Hugo about the most recent video coming from West Africa and from Banawi leading. It was a battle against Nigerian forces, and the Islamic State was using the Middle East tactics and explosive cars and everything from the Middle East, and it was very scary actually, because Nigerians had no idea what to do with musket cars equipped in camouflage, so prevented before being seen, and actually armored, so it was not an easy task to shoot them down before.
Right, they went from using kind of, your standard put a bomb in here or run into this place and shoot everybody, to having up armored disguised SVB IEDs, which, like you say, the Nigerian army just weren't capable of battling, because it was such a new development. Also, I think it's worth mentioning now that despite the fact in the media you never really hear about this for more than 2 seconds, you never hear about what they're up to. Boko Haram / ISIS in West Africa have actually killed more people than ISIS in the Middle East.
Yes, and we have to add that there are two branches right now. The Islamic State West Africa, run by Banawi, and the other force, run by Shekau.
Oh, so Shekau, the madman, came back and he didn't like being ousted. He's formed his own thing, right?
Yes, he started using his former name, but he still uses the Islamic State flag as if he was a member of the Islamic State, but he's not. And from we can say right now he has 4 times less power than Barnawi currently possesses. So it is the Islamic State West Africa that is right now much more powerful than the fighters that are fighting with Shekau. So this is a very great danger. But still, Shekau uses his the typical tactics like suicide explosive equipped on women who are tasked with bombing some markets, some mosques. This is why he was dismissed in the first place, because the Islamic State does not want to to actually get in anger the locals, right? And Shekau is doing everything he can to destroy everyone. So this is not an Islamic State's way to do things, even though they are very aggressive towards everyone, but not as aggressive as Shekau.
Yeah, also Shekau is just a madman, I think. You know, as horrible as ISIS are, they're very intelligent in the way they do their attacks, whereas Shekau is he's a hair trigger.
He is crazy, and let it stay like that. Let it stay like that. Hopefully he will get killed.
Yeah, and I could talk about this to you for hours. I'll have to get you back on the show, but I just want to finish up talking about ISIS in the Philippines and all around there.
So the Philippines, East Asia region, before the Islamic State did not build any kind of province right there. It was only East Asia. It was not Vilayat, right? So it was like only the fighters of the Caliphate that are fighting in the Philippines. We can mainly establish 2 networks that before 2017 pledged an allegiance to the Islamic State. And these 2 were Maute Group, that is mainly located in Maguindanao, near Lanao del Sur, and Marawi City, and in the north. So in the south of the Philippines and one of the biggest islands. The Maute Group was created actually in 2013, mainly by 2 brothers, Omar and Abdullah Maute, who were influenced by scholars in Saudi Arabia, who taught them Salafi thinking. And when the Islamic State was created, they quickly pledged an allegiance to the Islamic State. And the other one being Abu Sayyaf, the most famous terror, criminal, mafia, cartel group that has been running its mafia enterprises for 20 years in the south of the Philippines and in Malaysia. We can mainly talk about them as pirates, right? You surely remember from media that every year some kind of kidnapping, some Western hostages were kidnapped and are currently in the possession of Abu Sayyaf. But when the Islamic State was created, most of Abu Sayyaf group pledged an allegiance. Not all of Abu Sayyaf, because Abu Sayyaf is a network of groups, but majority of Abu Sayyaf groups pledged an allegiance to the Islamic State. And for 2 years, the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq actually did not acknowledge this fact that these guys pledged an allegiance to them. But finally, in 2016, the Islamic State released a video officially accepting bay'ah from the networks that are located in the Philippines, and named its emir of all the forces in East Asia, so the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and I think even Thailand and Singapore, that have to be led by Isnilon Hapilon, the infamous Abu Sayyaf pirate that pledged an allegiance to the Islamic State. And in 2016, it was found out in 2017 after the Battle of Marawi. The Islamic State sent envoys to Isnilon Hapilon that was at the time running his command at the island of Basilan. They sent him envoys to actually prepare a plan to establish a new East Asia vilayat and to conquer the south of the Philippines, where most Filipino Muslims are living. And these envoys were tasked with they were equipped with huge, with lot of money, right? Again, it comes to the money. And Isnilon, as we found out, Isnilon was sent at least $2 million from the Middle East.
They were sent around $2 million, right? I think you told me before, just in our various kind of late night chats about this stuff, I think you said that they actually sent them the money physically.
Physically from the Middle East, from Saudi Arabia, from Iraq, from Bangladesh. These envoys were tasked with sending them money and to deliver it in person. There were at least 4 envoys that are named by the US government and are the main reasons why the Philippines were in such a total disaster last year, right? So these envoys were very important for the Islamic State located in the Philippines.
How the hell? So they just smuggled the money, I guess.
Yes. Well, these envoys, of course, were coming back and forth, right? It was not a one-way job. So one guy just goes there and never comes back. No. These envoys were actually coming back a lot of times, not interrupted by neither Filipino police nor Malaysian. So they had a very easy job to deliver the cash to the Islamic State in the Philippines. Every envoy had at least $50,000 in the bag with him. So they had to at least do at least 30 travels from the Middle East to the Philippines. So as we can see, it is a total disaster for the authorities of the Southeast Asia countries like Malaysia and the Philippines, because they allowed to deliver so much cash from the Middle East.
Yeah, so ISIS in East Asia is very well funded now, hey?
Yes, it was the money they gathered from taxes in Syria and Iraq from the Mosul Bank when they gathered hundreds of millions of dollars when they conquered Mosul. And this money was not only located in Syria and Iraq, and to equip their fighters fighting in these countries, but to equip their fighters all over the world. So every vilayat, every province was delivered a cash from the Middle East. We can say that it is very similar to what Al-Qaeda has been doing, but they have never been able to deliver so much cash at once to every province they have in the world. So the Islamic State is kind of an inventor here, because nobody running a mafia network has ever been actually allowed to do so much bad money deliverance.
Yep. Pawel, I think we got it. I think that's excellent. I think we're really there. I think that was really good, man. That's very, very interesting. Where can people keep in touch with you? Where can they follow your research?
They can follow it mainly on Twitter for the time being, but I will start writing articles for foreign policy and other media.
Pawel, thank you very much. That was excellent.
You think?
It was Pawel Wojcik talking about ISIS and the spread of the Caliphate from Iraq and Syria to the rest of the world, specifically Afghanistan, Nigeria and East Asia. I strongly advise you to follow Pawel on Twitter to keep up to date with his research. It's incredible. That is at Saladin Aldroni, so SaladinAldroni. For bonus content, including bonus episodes, narrated articles, all sorts of stuff, go to patreon.com/popularfront. For the price of literally one cheap coffee a month, you get bonus episodes very frequently throughout the week, throughout the months. Also, you get to support Popular Front and help it grow up into something else, which I'm hoping it does. Thank you very much to the $30 Patreons. They are Stephen Henderson, Ryan Sandercock, Cole Gannon, Joel Tambusi, L.H. Kajetil, Zachary Hinch, Aliame Leroy, Andrew Stover, Daniel Shearer, Joanne Stocker, Margaret Bowling, and Teddy. If you listen to the podcast regularly, you'll see those $30 Patreons are definitely going up. It's very much appreciated, and I'm glad you lot like what I'm doing here. This episode was sponsored by defensepost.com, defense with an S. You can find some of Pawel's work there actually. He just wrote a really good piece about the rise of ISIS in Afghanistan. Definitely worth checking out, defensepost.com. For all things Popular Front, visit popularfront.co, or to keep up to date on Twitter, just follow me. That's Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. Also, we've got a YouTube now. We've got a YouTube channel because I'm going to be making what will basically be the first Popular Front news dispatch / documentary soon. So subscribe there to get hold of it. That is youtube.com/popularfront. Oh, and a few people recently have asked me how can they make a one-time donation to Popular Front, which kind of blew my head off, to be honest. I thought, wow, like, imagine someone wants to donate to Popular Front on a one-time basis just to help it, which I was really appreciative of. But a few people have asked me that now. So if you want to do that, it's paypal.me/Jake Hanrahan. All the money that is made through Popular Front goes back into Popular Front, into the podcast. I don't live off of this. I am a journalist and I can just about make money doing that. So yeah, everything goes back into Popular Front. So if you do want to help it, you will be helping it. Music in this episode, the intro is by an artist called Home, as usual, and the outro is by Son of Old. You can find his music at soundcloud.com/son-of-old. And I wanted to say as well, if you're listening to this and you make vaporwave or synthwave, that kind of music, the kind of music we feature in the outros on Popular Front, please do get in touch with me. And if you'd like it to be featured on an episode, I will do that. Email popularfrontpodcast@gmail.com about that, because I do need more music, because now we're doing weekly episodes.